Okay, welcome everybody to our session today, How Predictive Analytics Can Stem the Effects of Unplanned Absenteeism. My name is Tom McKeown. I'm the CEO and co-founder of TrenData. And again, I'd like to welcome you all for giving up a little of your Thursday here to spend some time with us and watch our session. So what we're going to cover today, I am going to give just a brief background on TrenData for those of you who we haven't visited with before or haven't come to our website. And then we'll get into the meat of the session. First thing I do want to talk a little bit about is, what are the differences between planned and unplanned absenteeism and some of the deeper nuances of that. Also, want to emphasize what are the business effects of unplanned absenteeism and what can actually be done about it. And then taking it that further step, how you can use technology. And for this example, we'll use the TrenData People Analytics solution to actually use technology to maybe forecast when absenteeism is going to happen and be able to plan for it so that you don't necessarily get caught like a deer in the headlights, so to speak, when people are calling in that morning. So, and then we've saved some time for questions at the end. So everybody will be on mute during the presentation, but if you have a question, just send it through the chat to Jonathan. And when we get to the end, we'll go through the ones you have. We actually did have some that were emailed in ahead of time too, which we'll go through those as well. Okay, a little background on TrenData. We are headquartered in Richardson, Texas, which for those of you familiar with the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we're just about 15 minutes north of Dallas. So if you ever get down this way, we'd love to see you. We launched the company back in 2017. Started shipping the product late in 2017. We sell largely to corporate clients, but also nonprofits, education, hospital. Basically, anybody with a workforce is an ideal client for us. Our solution is Predictive People Analytics, and it's a cloud SaaS offering, so it doesn't require any implementation on your infrastructure. It all runs in the cloud and can be accessed by a browser. So a little bit about what Predictive People Analytics is it's really three main components. It's the ability to first bring together all of your different data sources onto one platform. Typically in a HR environment, you have data spread across a couple of systems. Some of you are fortunate enough to have everything on one. There's also a lot of initiative in larger companies to put everything onto a data lake where you might be able to just move data in from one system with your internal systems, but a lot of companies have a separate HRIS, a separate finance, and a separate talent system, and a separate recruiting system as well. And you're probably bringing in some kind of benchmark data, maybe to compare what you're paying people versus what the industry says is standard. And you might be bringing in surveys, whether it's surveys on engagement for people who are working there or exit surveys when people leave the company as to why they leave. So we're able to bring all of this data onto one platform and build out predictive models with it. And we'll get into a little bit of that in the presentation today, where you can actually forecast into the future what's going to happen based on the current data and allows you to make decisions ahead of time, which saves you the ability of having to react that day and having the problems be more costly. We do a lot of it through basic visualizations, through our dashboards that both the current and historical analytics, but also the predictive analytics. And what the predictive really relies on is our AI machine learning platform, where your historical data is put into the system, and that's where the intelligence comes from to make future decisions. We call this prescriptive analytics because it's actually not only telling you what's going to happen, but also giving you the remedy of how to fix it. We've got a number of clients spread across multiple industries. So if you do get to the point where you're looking at doing something with TrenData and you want to talk to someone in your industry, geography, whatever, chances are we'll be able to serve you up a couple of people who can tell you what it's been like partnering with us. We have a number of partners who actually resell our solution, a listing of them there. ADP, Talent Guard, Deltek are some of the bigger ones. We also work with some pre-hire recruiting type solutions like Engage, Talent, Impact Workforce Technology, and in Sala, Employee Management is one of our most recent partners, and we're looking forward to working with them. All right, commercial's over. Let's talk about the subject matter which we attracted you with for this webinar. So looking at absences, so absence is pretty standard term. It's when someone doesn't come to work that day. But really, the bigger difference is whether it's a planned absence, which could be considered vacation, or an unplanned absence, which are really the killers, where the employer doesn't actually know that someone's going to be out until that morning or the beginning of the shift or whenever. And it really causes a stir where you are, so that things aren't able to be taken care of. There has to be a lot of running around, a lot of reallocating, and really what we're going to cover here is those unplanned absences and why they're so detrimental to a company. And I did want to introduce just this one concept, which a lot of companies have been doing over the last 10 to 20 years, of paid time off, and that's where you bundle someone's vacation and sick time together into one package. So rather than having 2 weeks of vacation and 5 sick days, you'll just get 3 weeks of PTO. It's intended to have a favorable effect, let employees be able to just take days off whenever they need them, but it does come with some different problems that we'll kind of talk about in the subsequent slides here. So just sticking with unplanned absences, life throws a lot of curveballs at you. So it's not like somebody's gold bricking because they call in sick that day. It's most of the time is something pretty justifiable. Someone wakes up sick that morning, or there's an emergency and something breaks at your house, or your kid breaks his arm at school or something like that. And then there's ones that maybe are a little less urgent, but that your spouse is going to be out of town and you have a 4-year-old kid. And then there's some instances where you just have a burnout, you just need a mental health day. I always think back to my very first job out of college. We had to work a year before we had any vacation time, but they did give us 5 sick days. So pretty much to a T, everybody used every one of those 5 sick days, but the employer never knew about it, so we'd use the sick day and not give any advance notice. But if those 5 days had been vacation days, the employer would have gotten notice that we weren't going to be there, and it probably would have been a better situation for them. But things you learn. And then there's more lascivious reasons why you might have an unplanned absence. Somebody might be skipping out for a job interview with somebody else. But basically, these are the type of things that would characterize someone not showing up and you not knowing about it before it happens. I was actually at lunch with a friend and colleague in the industry who's now an executive at a company called Carecom. It's an interesting product. It's a platform where you can go on to find babysitters, nannies, more long-term stuff like in-house home care for seniors or child care. It's an interesting product. Not going to do much commercial for it but now, but what was really relevant is we were kind of talking, and he said that they had done surveys and found out that basically most same-day absences where someone calls in that morning and says they can't come in, the employee actually knew they were going to take that day off 2 days ahead of time. So whatever the reasons, there is the possibility of getting notice when these things happen, which can have a big impact for the employer. But on top of that, just looking what happens when someone doesn't show up for work. For starters, if you don't know ahead of time, there's an immediate lapse in coverage. So for whatever it is, an hour and a half at the beginning of the day, while your employer is scrambling to put the resources in place to take over that job, there's a fair amount of time where something's not getting happen. If it's a customer service job, a delivery job, other things that are very tangible, and that can cost employers a lot. And then what generally happens is, during that first 90 minutes or so, the manager, whoever, has to either grab some coworker or coworkers to cover for the position, or in a lot of instances, we all went to school, you have to call in a substitute or something. So this is very costly to the employers. And even once all that's taken place, okay, so the job got covered, we pulled in a few people, as happened. The job for that day is generally done less well. And then there's the tangential effects of that. The other jobs and people you pulled in to help out, those jobs suffer as well. So it has kind of a systemic effect on performance when the employer or the manager doesn't have advance notice, is not ready. There's an interesting fact down there from the Macro Think Institute. They do an annual survey on a number of things, but they publish this figure every year. And it says that absence costs are about 8% of payrolls across the US. So you figure a company that's $1 billion and your payroll is 60% of that, $600 million, you're looking at about $60 million of costs related to absence every year. So it's not a small number at all. I've got the link here, but I think if you just Google Macro Think Institute, you can get that report, which has some good information on it. Some other interesting facts, and I wanted to tie this a little to the PTO, which I mentioned earlier. First of all, 40% of people actually call in sick when they're not sick. I always love the statistic below that from Monster.com that regularly 12 to 14% of employees call in sick after the Super Bowl. Maybe it's offset by the commercials, but just think of all the money that could be back in the economy if the Super Bowl was on a Saturday night instead of a Sunday night. That's probably the biggest hit, and they publish a statistic every year, and it's somewhere between 12 to 14%. But back up to the statistics above it. So 40% of people call in sick when they're not sick, but particularly on this paid time off. So the PTO, you're supposed to just be able to take days when you want, regardless. But 28% of the population still calls in with a reason, rather than saying, I'm not going to be in today. No, they always have to feel like they have a reason. So it's kind of a guilt thing, and a lot of that could be part culture, just employees, the way they feel. And generally, if they feel like they have to offer a reason, probably you're not going to get much advance notice of it, because they feel if they offer that reason 2 days ahead of time, somebody might try to talk them out of it or something. The other statistic underneath of it, which is very interesting, and this goes back to the PTO again, 33% of workers actually come in sick so that they can save those PTO days for actual vacation days. So they come in and get the rest of the organization all sick, so that they can have an extra day or two on their vacation, or that they can stockpile vacation and get paid for it when they leave the company. So a lot of things that it's good data to have both externally and through which you can pull up in your system, because what all of this means is there are historical patterns. So if you dig into your own data and also any type of industry data, you can start to get an idea of perhaps in advance when you're going to have a big block of people calling in unplanned absences, and maybe that allows you to stock up your bench. Always kind of admired the way airlines and hotels always overbook flights and rooms because they know there's going to be a certain amount of cancellation. And if you can get to that point with your workforce where you don't have a lot of people sitting on the bench and it's costing you a lot of money, those are types of things that you can do that will, one, alleviate the results of unplanned absences, and also give you that notice that this is when you're probably going to have to use less experienced workers in a particular position, just because you won't have the incumbent there. But the difference between having notice, even if it's just 2 days, versus knowing that morning, can mean a lot to the economy and particularly of your company. So just from a high level position, what are some things that you can do as an employer to actually make this problem less? The first of is if you can create a culture where people are not afraid to tell you that they're not going to be in. they might do it a couple of days in advance and not the morning of. And that would go a long way to allowing you to prepare for, being down a body that day. Also good to, have a pretty much a backup for every position in your organization. Succession planning is very big for executives, but it's not used a lot down the line to like the manager and staff level. So maybe you don't need necessarily an underling to take a position, but you may look at areas where you might be able to move people around in case of a crisis, particularly key positions. And by those, I don't mean executives, but I mean like customer-facing positions. If you've got a 10-person support staff, they each support 25 to 50 clients. One of those person doesn't show up, it has an impact. Or you have 10 drivers that are out there delivering, steel or whatever to people that you're going to collect big checks for. One of those doesn't show up. So, particularly those key type positions, you want to make sure you're covering backwards. More technical positions or even less technical positions, making sure that there's access to key information. So if that support person doesn't show up, you don't have the password to their laptop, you have no idea who they're working with or what got caught in the middle of, without violating privacy, being able to have certain information, whether it's on a common, in a CRM system or in a common network folder. These are key things to being able to do this, and just levels of transparency within the organization, knowing what having immediate managers knowing what their employees were working on, so perhaps they can step in and bridge the gap between at least that first 60 to 90 minutes when nothing's covered. Maybe the manager or someone can jump in and handle it. But the big key is to be organized with this type of thing, know that it's a problem you're going to face, and also have visibility into when and how it's happening, and you'll get a little glimpse at the future. Which leads us to the technological end, being able to have a system that will help you visualize the situation. So it removes subjectivity, as technology often does. It's not a gut feeling that I think nobody's going to show up at Christmas or something like that. You actually have the data that tells you that. Fact-based information that allow you to predict beforehand when you're going to have a problem and give you the ability to plan for it, even though the employee might tell you, the employee or employees don't tell you that day. So you can change your approach on how you're dealing with planned things as opposed to unplanned. And then the bottom bullet is basically if you can turn unplanned absences into planned absences, or at least unplanned absences into known advance absences. So if you know 2 days or 3 days before that you're likely to have a few people out, you can prepare for it, and it may not have to rely on the employee necessarily telling you that they're not going to be there. So with that, I was going to just show a few quick things in the TrenData system that can help you with this situation. And if I jump out of that, you should all be seeing a dashboard right now, which has a number of stats on it regarding absences and vacations. So typically when we work with a client, they'll load their data into our system, and the more history we have, generally the more accurate the predictions can be. So here's a situation where we've got a client that's had about 3 or 5 years, I think 5 years worth of data put into the system. You can see the number of employees, the average days of absences. You might want to track maybe who's had more than 5 days of unplanned absences, and maybe from a burnout stage you might be wanting to see who's not using their vacation. You can also measure the costs of this. What is absenteeism costing you? Because we can actually put financial data into the system, and other factors, maybe like how far are your people coming into work every day, and maybe break things down by department. So let's kind of look at just this total absences. So this is an analytic which is showing us basically we've got a pretty regular stream of 200 to 250 absences. Which is about a quarter of our population that's absent every month. Striking as that might be, that's about average. The average employee has about 3 unplanned absences a year, and if you divide that by 12, that's a quarter every month. So what you can do when you go in and look at this, you can look at it, first of all, stretched out over the year, where you can look at, in this particular instance, it's saying that there's not a lot of change in the absences, other than right here from December to January. It went up about 25 people and actually kind of stayed there. Now, it doesn't look like much of a bump on this curve, but if you have 25 more people absent every month, that starts to have an effect, and it looks like it bumped up to that and stayed there. You can go back a couple of years. Like I said, if you have a couple of years of data in the system, you can see in this instance that has a year-over-year effect. We used to average about 200 back in 2015. It's been slowly going up. And this year, even with 2 months left in the year, we're at 254 absences in the company. So we have a problem that's possibly getting a little worse. Now, you can look at this in aggregate, as we're doing here, or you could drill down and maybe look at a particular department. So this is a bank we're looking at, as a commercial, consumer, mortgage, private wealth, and securities. If we want to take a little closer look on the securities dashboard, we can do that. And when we come here, we've got pretty much the same data, but there's a little bit more disparate patterns. So in addition, you can look here and see a lot of the same stats. But if we look at that trailing 12, we can see that this one's a little more erratic down in this department. So let's take a little bit closer look at that and see if any patterns develop. So what we've got is, a low in November, kind of climbed all the way up to May, and then dropped way down in June. It's an odd month, June, to have less absences. Well, what if we can kind of pin maybe up here what happened during that time period? Might give us an answer to some of these questions. So let's use the TrenData events overlay. And what that tells me is, first of all, we didn't lose a lot of people during the Super Bowl, but we do pay bonuses in June. So maybe a lot of people didn't want to be calling in sick in a month where they're going to be getting bonuses, and that's possibly what drove this down in the month of June. And then you move into the summer where school's out, and it starts climbing back up again, reaching an almost annual high here in August. So it's something that can tell you a lot. If you can tie up just what's happened and match it up with the data pattern, can give you a lot of information. Now we can also go back and look at a future look. So right now up here you have, these are the trailing 12, and we've got a predictive view, which is showing us that these are the last 6 months from up here, and then the system is predicting based on historical patterns that this is what's going to happen over the next 6 months as far as absences. So let's kind of take a look at that and see what we can do with that information. So as I drill down into that, I can look at it in a couple of different ways. So first of all, looks like I'm going to have bigger than absences in April, but it looks like most of the absences are bigger in the second half of the year, or at least the second 6 months of this 12. But I can also drill down on this and see what kind of information I can get out of it. So for example, I have a metric in here which tracks how long people have to get to work, drive to get to work. So if I splice this data by commute distance, to nobody's surprise, you're going to find that most of the people who have unplanned absences every month are the people who have to drive the farthest to work. In some instances, it's a very large disparity, but in most instances, it is always the largest group. So that's something you might want to take in consideration. We can also look at it by a couple of other things. Perhaps we might want to look at it by gender, which might bring up certain things as to, in certain times, males are taking more off as opposed to females. But there might be some information here that, maybe April is cold and flu season, and maybe moms or single moms have to be home more often during those. So a lot of information you can draw if you just know what's coming, and then you can kind of plan right about here. Maybe I need to have some extra staff on board if I know that this is going to be, a large absentee population in the upcoming months. And the models generally are, 85+% accurate. So the fact that you can actually know this ahead of time, you can feel pretty comfortable spending the money for the replacements without having to then go ahead and have a lot of people sitting on the bench with no work to do. It's very easy to actually create and build these dashboards. We start from a metric library where you can basically populate and pull data across many environments. If you wanted to go into organization, and in addition to absences, you might want to pull turnover, or you might want to look at for example, the average tenure of your team. If you want to just add that to one of these dashboards, you can just click add and decide which dashboard you want to put it on. I just want to put it on the the overall dashboard. I can do that, and once I go there, I can pretty much take it, put it whatever size I want, and then even move it around to a different location on the screen if I'm so inclined. So that's what happens with the data once you have it. Now we also have the feature I talked about earlier, the natural language capabilities. Now that'll let you, one, search the system for particular insights, but it'll also allow you to build new metrics if they're not in the library. So suppose I wanted to look at employees by average absences, then by performance scores, which is not a pre-built metric I have in the system. I can just type that in, and it'll actually build out a metric that'll show me by my performance score system what the particular ranks were. If I wanted to qualify that and not have everybody in it who doesn't have a performance score, I can just learn how to spell and performance score greater than 0. And so what that's going to do is then get rid of that null and give me this full graph. Now the interesting thing about this is, may show something about the data I have, is the people with the most unplanned absences actually have the highest performance scores, whereas the people with the least are actually getting the lowest performance scores. So always some information, don't always expect it to tell you what you think ahead of time. So good to be able to look at that. And then if I wanted to add this to the dashboard, I can do that as well. Select a name for it and then put it on whichever dashboard that I'm looking for. So very useful at that point. The last thing I wanted to just show is that you can actually pull data from multiple sources. So like I said earlier, generally most HR departments that we see have their data spread across multiple systems. And so we allow you to bring in data from all of those systems onto one single platform. You can also bring it in from flat files, CSV files, as well as bringing in your external data if you want to pull in benchmark from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or some salary data from salary.com, Mercer, or somebody. We can do that with everybody. So pretty much that's the demonstration. Hopefully that whetted your appetite, but I'm going to jump back to the presentation right now and see if anybody has any questions. So I think Jonathan's been keeping track of those. Do we have any on the system, Jonathan? Anybody submit anything?
Yes. So the first one for you, Tom, is, can your system delineate multiple absence types?
Yes, actually, that's a good question, because a lot of companies we've seen have 5 to 6 categories of absentee types: furlough, sabbatical, vacation, absent. So yeah, you can actually bring in as many filters or as many types of really any type of data you bring in, not just absence, but also employee type, ethnicity. You can have multiple types of pretty much any metric you bring into the TrenData system.
Okay, great. Another one is, what if absence data is in a separate system? What can you do there?
Well, it kind of gets back to the last part that I had talking about the multiple data systems. Actually, it's pretty common. A lot of times, clients will have a time and attendance system where they'll have their absentee data, and they might again have a separate HRIS. Sometimes those are one system, sometimes they're not. So yeah, the system, that falls right into what we talk about. We talk about people analytics. It's the ability to aggregate data from multiple systems to build those predictive models. So absolutely, yeah, we can do that.
Good deal. Is absence identification part of the entire system, or is it an additional, I think what they were trying to say was module?
Sounds like we might have an existing customer on the line wanting to find out if they have to pay more for something. No, actually, absences are just another metric that is part of the people analytics system. So we would just help you build out a dashboard around that specific metric. As you can see, we had about 40 to 45 just out of the box metrics that TrenData tracks, and one of them is absences. But you can add more metrics to it, all right into the base system, and have your specified absence dashboard, but also have another dashboard that might focus on retention, recruiting, or just an overall view for you. Okay.
So yeah, one more here is if you don't happen to have an API to our systems, how difficult would it be to build out that interface?
Okay. Well, generally having an API is the easiest because you just plug it right in and it pulls the data in. But we're finding a bit of a trend. First off, if you don't have the API, and we can build an API to any system to connect with the data. But we're finding a trend of somewhat clients not wanting to build APIs into the system. One, the vendors are starting to charge a lot of money for that, which is silly. It's just being able to use their data that you paid for. And also a lot of functional groups like HR, like finance, don't want to have to go through their IT group. So what they generally do is just do an automated file feed where it's basically a report that they produce that has all of the relevant fields in it. And we just upload that into the system. And as I spoke earlier too about the building of data lakes, where a lot of clients, particularly very large clients that might have 10 or 20 different systems, are porting everything into this one data lake, in which case we only have to have one feed coming from there. So the answer to the question is, if you don't have an API, we can build it. If you can't get access to an API, we can do an automated file load. So there's a lot of avenues, but we'll get your data into the system.
All right, that does it for questions from the audience, unless there's any last minute chats.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, here's both my information and to TrenData information. So if you want to send me an email, it's just tom@trendata.com. My Twitter handle is Tom McKeown, and if I have a blog, I do have a blog, it's tommckeown.net. You can go and read any of my past writings. TrenData, if you want general information, just email marketing@TrenData. Our Twitter handle is TrenData Inc. And if you just want to visit the website, it's trendata.com. And I believe we have a section where you can, I think it's resources or whatever, where you can actually pull down and find all of our historical webinars. This one will be up on the system. It will be up there recorded in a couple of days. And we've got a pretty big library of different recorded webinars that you can go and take a look at. So I encourage you to do so. Reach out to us again if you'd like a little deeper dive into the TrenData system. We'll definitely put you together with one of our great account reps who can walk you through the system. And we'd love to partner with you someday, but even if you just want to stay informed, come to our webinars, partake of our resource library. It's all open and free, and we invite you to do so. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.